right, welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider and newsletter, and celebrating our 30th year of publication this year. Yay! So we are happy to be back after a 2-week hiatus. And just so I don't forget, I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to try to remember to say this again toward the end of tonight. But starting in November, we are going to be moving the social to Tuesday nights because there's a lot of Kidlit stuff going on Thursday nights, and we want you to be able to go to everything, especially keep coming to us. So we will not be meeting next week on election day. I know we just had 2 weeks off, but we are going to have to take next week off because we'll all be preoccupied. But then after that, Tuesdays, I've got every Tuesday booked out from after next week. I don't know what date that is. Through the winter. So don't worry, we will be here for you, but Tuesday nights. So we'll remind you in the emails and all of that, but I just wanted to put that out there now so that we don't forget to tell you. You can start putting that on your calendar. All right. So if you are new to us and you want to be on our mailing list to get notices about all of our upcoming socials and other events, you can go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet. And you will get a free ebook called the Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet, where we have 30 years of information about getting started writing for kids in this free ebook. And then you will be on our list to notify you about upcoming distancing social guests, as well as other fun stuff we do. And if you're not a subscriber to CBI, please go to writeforkids.org/CBI. It's our monthly newsletter. It's only $5 a month. And it is about 20 pages of information every month. And we feature every month a special submission opportunity where an editor or agent gives us an above the slush code for our CBI subscribers only. It's a special code you put usually in the subject line of the email when you're submitting that lets you jump over the slush pile and have your manuscript read first. So that's really awesome. But we also have other market listings in there, all sorts of articles on writing and being having a career in children's books. So we hope you join us for that. So where in the world are you? I ask you to send me pictures of where you are, where you've been, especially if they have some sort of literary connection. So I'm going to show you who we have today. This is Mary York. She sent this in, and I want you to try to guess in the chat box where she is. This is a very exotic place. So let me hear your best guesses in the chat box there. This is a tough one. Japan, no. Thailand, no. Cambodia, no. I would have guessed all of those things. China, nope. Somewhere in Ireland, nope, not Ireland. Seoul, nope. Well, it is Ricefield. Good, Terry. I want to be a little more specific about where in the world the rice field might be. India, no. I'll give you a couple more guesses and then I'll tell you. Not England. Oops, I put my chat box up. Laos, no. These are all really good guesses. Vietnam. I could totally see where you would think all of these things. Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia. Oh, Leslie. Yes. So she is in, let me go to the next slide, in Bali, Ubud, I think that's how you say that, in Bali, which is part of Indonesia. You can see in the little map there, the town of Ubud In the uplands of Bali, Indonesia, is an artist community of writers, painters, weavers, woodworkers, dancers, and musicians. And Mary says, for several years, we visited our son and family in Ubud and stayed at a small hotel overlooking the rice paddies. The rice paddies are terraced in such a way that each farmer gets water from paddies at a higher elevation, which are fed by rivers coming from the mountains. This ecosystem of water sharing, sorry, I'm making my cursor crazy here, has been in places for centuries, and one drop of water is used many times before making its way down to the sea. Isn't that awesome? I just think that's so clever. Whoops. Sorry. I have two screens going here, and today it's just too much for my brain to handle. Sorry about that. The forest in the background of that other picture you just saw is part of the renowned Monkey Forest Sanctuary, replete with, you guessed it, monkeys. And I have a picture here from the Monkey Sanctuary as well. So here's the literary tie-in. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, spent time in Bali. Interestingly, the movie version took some artistic license and showed Ubud as being on the coast, which it is not. So never trust Hollywood to give you factual information. But I just think that's so cool. I think that's probably the most exotic location we've had so far in Where in the World. So thank you, Mary, for sending that in. So I want to hear from you. Take a picture of yourself or just a picture in front of a literary landmark or somewhere that inspires your writing or doing some writing related activity, and email it to me with a brief description of where you are and attach the photo as a JPEG, or send us a link where we can download it from your Facebook page or whatever. Email it to writeforkids.org and put Where in the World in the subject line. And I would love to feature you on a future distancing social. So now we get to celebrate. Woo! So I have 3 cool celebrates today from our people. Kendra Silk, I have to say her name right. Chrysler, oh, I'm going to mess this up. Chrysler? I'm sorry, Kendra, if I said that wrong. Her essay was chosen to appear in Beneath the Mask, an anthology of short nonfiction pieces about blessings in the time of COVID, to be published by Global Fire Publishing this holiday season. So congrats on that, Kendra. I know you're very excited about that. Sandra Sullivan Abiger, I am really bad with names tonight. I apologize. Got her first magazine writing assignment with Writer's Digest magazine. And she credits our magazine writing blueprint for helping her get there. So Sandra, congratulations on that. That's awesome. And here's another one for me. Cheryl Kramarskik, I'm sorry, Cheryl, wrote, I finished working through my work in progress with the storyline edit in Manuscript Magic, which is one of our writing blueprint products. Onward, scene level. I'm actually excited about editing. I'm making progress. Woohoo. Yes, Cheryl, we appreciate that. And I admire your enthusiasm. I'm happy to hear it. And we celebrate that progress with you. Everything, every little step of the way, we want to celebrate with you. So I want to hear about it. So send us your good news. Email mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line. And I will feature you on a future Kidlit Distancing social, because we all need to celebrate together and keep each other going. So that's awesome. Okay, we're going to take a poll. We have a fun one today. Who is the scariest Kidlit character? All right, you get to vote between Lord Voldemort, Harry Potter, Cruella de Vil, 101 Dalmatians, Wicked Witch of the West, Wizard of Oz, the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia, Count Olaf from A Series of Unfortunate Events, and the Wolf from Little Red Riding Hood. So, in honor of Halloween, who's the scariest Kidlit character of the choices you have in front of you? Give you 5 more seconds to vote. All right, I'm going to end the polling. Here we go. And share results. And we have the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz. I can't argue with that, though I think these are all pretty scary. So happy Halloween, everybody. Okay, a couple links of interest here. A great post on Nathan Bransford's blog, How to Keep Up with the Publishing Industry in 2020. He has a list of links for websites, blogs, Twitter addresses, newsletters you can follow to keep up on publishing trends, writing tips, and what editors and agents are looking for. And keeping up with the industry is not easy. It's a full-time job. So he put together a really good list of some sort of key places that you can subscribe to, follow, and just keep up on what's going on. So I made a bit.ly link that goes straight to this post. It's bit.ly/keep up with publishing. Or you can just go to his blog, nathanbransford.com, and you will see the post there. Also, what can you learn about platform from a 12-year-old? What you can learn about platform from a 12-year-old, I'm sorry, by Michelle Melton Cox on Jaden Friedman's blog, explains how building an online platform is very similar to making friends in school. And I thought this was a great approach. I know creating an author platform, an online presence, is very intimidating to a lot of people, and they don't even know how to get started. And she has a really good philosophy about that in this particular article. So I made a bit.ly link, bit.ly/learn about platform. So those are 2 good links for you this week. Okay, now I get to welcome my guest. Nicole Kear is the author of the memoir, Now I See You, from St. Martin's Press, chosen as a must-read by all sorts of places, People Magazine, Martha Stewart Living Parade, Redbook, among others. Hi, Nicole. Her books for children include the recently released middle grade novel, Foreverland, a chapter book series, The Fix-It Friends, and the middle grade series, The Startup Squad, co-written with Brian Weisfeld. And those are all published by Macmillan Kids imprint. Her essays appear in the New York Times. Well, you can see all these places her essays have appeared. I mean, very, very impressive resume here that Nicole has. So she's also teaches nonfiction writing at Columbia University and the NYU School of Professional Studies. So Nicole, welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. We're so glad to have you here tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So you are a memoirist. I'm having trouble talking tonight, and I apologize for that. My brain is on overload right now. A memoirist, blogger, essayist, and children's book writer. So how do you classify yourself as a writer, or do you try to pigeonhole who you are?
No, I really don't. I think of myself as a writer and an author, and over time, my interests have changed in terms of the audience I wanted to reach. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that I haven't sort of codified my, approach or genre. I just sort of go with what I'm currently interested in. So I started writing for magazines. The very first thing that I ever wrote 15 years ago was the story of my son's birth. And I started writing for parenting magazines. And then from there, had the urge and inspiration to write a memoir. And I really enjoyed that. But after publishing that, doing a lot of speaking engagements with that and writing a lot of personal essays around that for the adult market, I was, spending a lot of time with my kids and just reading an inordinate amount of children's literature. And so that really became the pull. So I started to write for children. So I do not classify myself, no, maybe it's crazy not to do it.
Well, I think it's good because I think a lot of writers, especially when they kind of start out, they feel like I have to find my niche and I have to focus on that and master that, and then maybe I can move on to something else. But I imagine, you wrote so many things from your own life in your essays and certainly in your memoir. And then when you moved on to children's books, do you feel that having sort of dug into your own life so much previously, did that influence the way you wrote your children's books, or did it influence the way you sort of approached your ideas for writing for children?
Yeah, I think that it did for a lot of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is I published my memoir, and having that out in the world and people reading it and hearing so many responses from readers really confirmed what I have always known, which is sort of the incredible power of literature to cure isolation, bring people together, validate people's experience. So I heard from so many people who read my memoir who were excited to tell me, I could relate so much. This memoir helped me so much. And so that I've always felt that as a reader, just that sense of, books being an antidote for so many things. But having that experience on that kind of a scale as a writer really led me to believe in the power of literature to do that. And so that is something that I carried over with me into my writing for children, because I really, in writing the Fix It Friends, which was my first series, I really wanted to write a series that would help kids that were struggling with common social emotional issues to feel less isolated, less alone, and to really validate their experience and reflect that and represent them. And that, I would say, is a direct result of the experience I had with my reception of my memoir. So there's that element to it. And there's also just, writing nonfiction, the kind of demands of authenticity and the way in which that you're called upon to recount your experiences with a kind of honesty, not just about the facts, but an emotional honesty, I think was good instruction for fiction as well, because while, the plot of my books for children, my fiction books, are not true, I use so much of my experience, my kids' experience, and I put so much of that in the books that they really do feel, I mean, they're not memoir, but they feel like memoir adjacent, or certainly like loosely autobiographical to a large extent.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that authenticity is so important in fiction. Even if you're writing a fantastical plot, you have to have that thread, those themes or certain things running through the plot that every reader can relate to and really see some of themselves in the story. And I think, I imagine writing your essays and your memoir sort of primed you to be able to do that without being afraid, I guess, of opening yourself up.
It definitely increases your comfort level, sort of exposing yourself in that way. So, it's funny because sometimes in the middle of the night or at various points, I will think to myself, this thing happened to me. I'll remember a memory from my life or my experience, and I'll think, did I include that in my memoir? Then I'll have like a moment where I'm like, I think I included that in my book that people have read. Like, whoa, that's crazy. But it is very much like walking a tightrope, to use a cliched and overused metaphor. Like, when I was writing the memoir, I kind of had to believe that no one would ever read it. I had sold it on proposal, so I knew it would be a book, but it was my first book, and I kind of didn't fully believe it would be real, which really gave me the ability, the freedom and confidence to write it. And then from there, fiction has been easier because, you know, you do have, it's a surrogated self. You don't need to lay yourself quite as bare.
Sure. Yeah. Now, your chapter book series, Fix It Friends, is, you know, structurally very different from writing a memoir. You're writing for a much younger age group. There's certain conventions in writing a chapter book that are important because these are kids who are reading on their own, but some of them are fairly newly independent readers. What did you do to learn the conventions of this particular age group and understand how to write a chapter book?
What I did was really simple. I just read a ton of chapter books. And I was already reading a lot of books for this age group anyway, because at the time that I wrote the Fix It Friends, I have 3 children, and the characters in the Fix It Friends, the protagonists are based on my children, the family, and they are the exact age that my children were when I was writing this book. And so my middle daughter was 7, and she's the inspiration for the Veronica character. So 7 years old, she was reading obviously a lot on her own, but we would read together every single night. And so I read and read and read, and that's really the way that I got a feel for the conventions. And it's funny because, you know, taking the shift, I remember distinctly shifting from the adult memoir to the children's chapter book series. At some point when I submitted my manuscript to my agent, I remember asking him, like, are there rules that I should know about in terms of, you know, what kind of language I should be using, or, you know, like gradients of literacy or vocabulary? Like, is there some kind of official information manual? And it was funny because he was like, no, like, you know more than, like, you know what to do. Don't worry about it. It's great. And part of that issue was, you know, handled in revision, because in terms of the tuning up the language to make it appropriate and kind of ideal for the age group is something that I could do later on in revision. So I could sort of question, is this word going to be, you know, too unfamiliar for them? If it is unfamiliar, is it a degree of unfamiliar? Like, can they get it from the context, or is it going to pull them out of the story? So those were things that I could tackle in revision, but really reading was the main preparation for that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the best advice that any writer could get, is just really reading. You know, I always tell people 100 books in the age group that you want to write for is sort of the standard amount you should read. And if you're writing YA, that's a big job. If you're writing picture books, it's a lot easier, but I think that's the best education. So
Yeah.
when you're, yeah, so when you're creating a series, do you start by envisioning the characters or sort of the overall concept? And do you think it's important for a series to have sort of a clear hook to it that gives it a layer beyond just being a series of compelling storylines? I mean, the Fix It Friends, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what that concept is of this series so people understand?
Sure. Yeah, the Fix It Friends is a 6-book chapter book series about a group of 2nd graders, and they team up with friends to help kids in their communities who are struggling with common social emotional challenges. So it's a different social emotional challenge in every book. The first one is about a little girl who's having issues with anxiety. And then there's a boy who's being teased, and a girl who has a learning difference. There's one about grief, one about attention issues, and one about friendship. And so it's not a super high concept book. You know, these are issues that are just so widespread and common and pervasive. So the concept is definitely where I began. It's not a high concept, but it was a very compelling concept to me. I had been, as I said, I had 3 children, and my kids were 9, 7, and 2 at the time. And my older children had been struggling with anxiety, and when you have 3 kids, like, you have tons of kids in your house, right? So I just was so much steeped in the world of elementary school kids, and I could see that, like, so many of them were grappling with anxiety, so many of them with attention issues, learning differences. I mean, just so many challenges. And I had learned through my experience with my own children that there were so many proactive ways that kids could empower themselves to, tackle these issues and really make a lot of headway with that. But it seemed to me in a lot of the books that I was reading with my children that in the worlds of the children's literature, there weren't a ton of kids who were grappling with these issues. It seemed like I noticed a really marked shift between middle grade books in terms of the subject of middle grade books and sort of chapter books, where all of the big issues are always tackled. I mean, middle grade books will cover every kind of issue, no matter how intense and ponderous. And those are covered in a lot of chapter books, but it tends to be kind of what the book is about, right? Like, and from this was a few years ago already, this trend is changing, but I sometimes found that the chapter books that did tackle these issues were kind of didactic and instructional, like self-help kind of books. And I wanted it to be more normalized. I just wanted the characters in this world that I was constructing to reflect the children that I knew, not just my children, but their friends and the kids in their school. And those were kids who were, a lot of them struggling with these issues. And so that was the idea for the series was born from that impulse. What if I wanted my kids to read books where they could see their own experience reflected. And that was what compelled me to write the series. And from there, the characters really came because I based them so much on, kids that I know and experience. It was really, the characters came to life almost instantly.
Mm-hmm. Great. And see, that's another great example of, because you read so much, you read so many chapter books, you saw what was missing. You saw this little hole that you wanted to fill and do it a little bit differently. And that for people who don't understand what a hook is, being able to sum up in one sentence what this series is about and what sets it apart is really the hook. And that's what you've got there very, very clearly. So I think that's why they're so awesome.
It helps when you're trying to sell a series to be able to say, this plugs a hole in the marketplace. There's nothing exactly like it. And to be able to say there's enough books that are similar to it that, it's not going out too much on a limb, so you don't have to worry about your investment, but it's different enough that people will gravitate towards it because there's nothing else for them if they're looking for this. So I do feel like from a marketing standpoint, that's not where the idea was born. The idea, was born from my experience, but then I started to think, yeah, this could really work. People, a publisher might want to publish this because I do feel like it's a niche that needs to be, addressed.
Absolutely. And it helps the editor out so much when they go to their editorial board and say, I want to publish this because, and if they have that information in front of them, they can make the case for your series much more easily.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in my materials that I worked up with when I was trying to sell the Fix It Friends, I had, anxiety affects 1 in 5 children. Like, there was just a lot of persuasive evidence that these are pervasive issues. and that even if kids are not dealing with one of these 6 issues, you know, friends in their lives are, and also, you know, it's representative of the world that their parents, I think, would like to live in. So I definitely tried to be savvy from a marketing standpoint in that way.
Right. So when you proposed the series, what was in the packet for the proposal?
Oh boy, I'm trying to remember now.
I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that.
No, I know. I can hardly remember because of pandemic. Like I can hardly remember what happened last week. Time is so weird. But I had written the first book in the series, and I had, if I'm not very much mistaken, I had a short synopsis for each of the 6 books. And they did change. I'm pretty sure I swapped out like 2 of the ideas I had ended up not becoming books, and I had, you know, I replaced them with 2 other ideas. But I had like a short paragraph on each book and the first manuscript. And then the part that really did take me a long time was the part that we were just talking about, sort of the pitch about why this series would sell. And that was the part where I really wanted to just think very critically and give them, you know, evidence that they would find irresistible. So that did take me a long time. It was short, but I think I found, you know, comp titles. I did this for my memoir because I sold it on proposal. So I only had the first few chapters, but the proposal was just had a lot of marketing information. And I did talk about my platform in both my memoir proposal and in my Fix It Friends pitch, you know, just a little bit about why I would be a good candidate to write this kind of a series.
Right. And just so people understand, nonfiction can be sold on a proposal, whereas fiction generally, at least in the children's market, requires you to have written at least 1 book in the series. They're not going to buy, unless they know you, unless you're already a published author, they're not necessarily going to buy fiction on just a proposal. So platform, I'm glad you brought that up. So how important is platform? You said you even put it in your proposal. And a lot of authors are very intimidated about this whole idea of, do I have to have a platform? Do I have to create it before I get published? What does it look like? So what kinds of things do you do to create your online presence?
That's a good question. So the idea of the necessity of having a platform is something that I really did carry over from my memoir, because I do think, as a general rule, it is much more important with nonfiction. I just think fiction, it's maybe a different set of expectations. But yeah, when I set out to write the Fix It Friends, I had a adult literature platform. Like I had all of these readers who had bought Now I See You, my memoir. And those, though, don't really translate to the children's market, right? The people who buy adult memoir may be interested in buying a chapter book series for their kids, but absolutely may not be. So I couldn't leverage my adult platform for the children's market. But yeah, for the Fix It Friends, I really just talked about, I had written in the parenting sector for parenting magazines for many years. So I had a lot of great contacts with experts in children's development. And one of the things I really wanted to be clear about with the Fix It Friends, probably I should have mentioned this earlier, was that I wanted it to be very well rooted in research. So I wanted the characters in the book to help, let's say for the first book, it's about a little girl who suffers from anxiety. I wanted them to systematically help her tackle her anxiety with legitimate data-driven strategies such as cognitive behavioral therapy and gradual desensitization and all of these things, that if you mention them to children, they would like instantly fall asleep and be super turned off. So I wanted to really tuck it, like fold it into the narrative so imperceptibly that the children wouldn't notice it. But I wanted the strategies themselves to be really heavily vetted by experts so that it would feel like, you know, the best of both worlds, right? It's like kid tested, mother approved type of thing. So I wanted the parents to be able to say, oh, I feel great about buying this book for my kid because it's educational and raising their EQ, and the kids to be like, oh, this is just a hilarious series about, you know, this funny toddler and this hilarious character who reminds me of Ramona Quimby, and like they conceivably could finish the whole series without ever realizing they were learning anything. So that was a big part of my kind of vision. And in my connections that I had established, interviewing experts in the parenting sector are something that I mentioned in that, it's not a proposal, but the series pitch. And then beyond that, I've been trying to be better about social media. I feel like I'm not the only writer like this, I'm sure, but it's not something I'm super excited to do. Mm-hmm. I'm not like, yay! I can't wait. I feel, somewhat clumsy with it. Like I have a 13-year-old and half the time I want to be like, can you just post about this for me? You'll know all the hashtags. And but and with the Fix It Friends, which was a few years ago, I didn't do very much of that until the book, was published. So it wasn't part of the selling process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think that's really interesting. I started to say earlier how a lot of writers, when they get started, they feel they need to focus just on one area. But all of the things you've done have fed into each other, even just the connections you had from writing for parenting publications helped inform what you were doing with your chapter book series. So in a lot of ways, it seems like if as a writer, you're willing to just kind of write whatever inspires you in lots of areas, it's all going to end up helping, your career as a whole.
I think that's true. And I do, I feel like in the series pitch, I'm sure I mentioned this, I'm remembering now a sentence that I wrote in which I tried to connect my memoir to the Fix It Friends series, which at, first glance might seem like worlds apart. But one of the things I did mention, which I think is really true, is, something that I feel is one of my strengths and part of my, quote unquote brand as a writer. Certainly my style is I really like to address dark subjects with a light touch. So my memoir is about, I was diagnosed with a retinal disease when I was 19, a degenerative retinal disease. And the memoir is about me kind of coming to terms with that diagnosis and losing vision as a young woman and a young mother. But it's a very, very funny book, which people don't expect. So what I was trying to sort of communicate to publishers was that, these can be very heavy subjects, talking about grief and for kids, and some of these challenges, they can be heavy subjects, but I am adept at addressing them with a really light touch. And that is a skill that I, established in my nonfiction adult work, which I'm carrying through. And that is absolutely something that I think is true with all of my books, regardless of, what the age is. I think that is, my voice is somewhat, that's a really stable part of my narrative voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. Because of your work on the Fix It Friends, published by Macmillan, they paired you up with Brian Weisfeld, who created the Startup Squad. And we had Brian on a few weeks ago on the Distancing Social, a middle grade series, but for young entrepreneurs. It's fiction, but it encourages girls primarily to become young entrepreneurs. And I know that he explained that he came up for the concept for the series and he even wrote the first manuscript, but then he and Macmillan decided he wasn't the best person to write the manuscript. And I guess that's when they brought you in. So you were writing someone else's concept, basically. How was that? How was that experience for you? Was that difficult for you to do?
No, it was fantastic. It was really great. And when I agreed to do it, I was excited and I was optimistic because I really got behind the idea. I loved the idea of his mission. I like Brian, but I didn't know what it would be like because I've never had that kind of a relationship. My ideas have always been my own, and I've really had sole ownership of the execution. It was so lovely, I have to say. So, Brian had an idea about what the plot should be, and a general idea of the characters. But I really feel like it was a really seamless kind of marriage because the characters in the books that, their books are done, and those characters feel like my characters. Like they feel 100% mine. Because the devil is in the details, right? So I was able, just with the details, to really feel like these are my characters. So I felt fully invested. And the plot, as a writer, I generally am much more interested in character, and plot for me is less intuitive. I struggle with it more. So I was kind of happy to have a partner in that way, someone who came to me and said, this is what we want to get accomplished. Like, here's where we want to start, here's where we want to end. In the middle, like, is your domain. How do you want to get there? And for me, having that structure was really liberating, actually. So I found it to be fantastic.
Yeah, great. So your middle grade novel, Foreverland, which came out this past April, I believe, got great reviews. And I'm wondering, creating authentic middle grade characters is probably, in my opinion, the hardest challenge for any kind of children's writer, because these characters really teeter on that edge between childhood and adolescence, and they go back and forth constantly. So how do you write these characters without sounding like a grown-up? It's so easy to sound condescending, or you sound like an adult trying to write like an adolescent. So how do you capture the voices of the middle graders?
I love middle grade literature. I really do. Some of my favorite books of all time are middle grade books that I read as a kid, and some that I've read as an adult with my own kids. So part of what, and I think what's part of why I enjoy it so much is you do have the ability to dig into, all sorts of deep, dark things. And the characters are at such a transformative point in their lives. So the book itself is about just what you had just mentioned about being an age, 12 years old, where you are floating between adolescence and childhood. And in fact, I wrote an essay about this, about the power of middle grade literature as inhabiting this incredible liminal space, the bridge between adulthood and or adolescence and childhood. Because
I'm putting a link to that in the chat box. I was going to say, it's an amazing essay. I read it this afternoon. And so I'm putting a direct link for those of you who are live in the chat box to this essay, but it was on the Nerdy Book Club website, and it was called The Last Night in the Nursery.
Yes.
So yeah, if you're watching this on replay, we'll probably have the link below it, but you can also go to the Nerdy Book Book Club website and just look for The Last Night in the Nursery. So anyway, continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. So Foreverland is about this 12-year-old girl, Margaret, and she's having trouble at home. So she runs away to live in an amusement park. And when she gets there, she meets this mysterious boy who has also run away to live in the amusement park, but for reasons of his own. And so then they strike up a friendship, and that's really, this friendship sparks transformation, which is what the book is about. But I was inspired to write this by the Peter Pan story. And so that's why my piece for the Nerdy Book Club is called The Last Night in the Nursery. Again, it was a really personal inspiration. My son at that time was 12, and he kept saying to me, I don't want to grow up. I'm scared to grow up. Like I don't want to have responsibilities. I want to keep being a kid. And he had this nostalgia, like, remember when I was a kid and I didn't have to worry about anything? And I thought it was such a strange phenomenon to happen because of course he was still a kid, being 12. Yeah. But then I was thinking about Peter Pan, and that Peter Pan is really about, Wendy's last night in the nursery, her last night with the kids, and this big, amazing, radical adventure that happens in the last gasps of childhood, which really is what being 12 years old is. So I was so excited to explore that, but it is precarious, as you say, in terms of voice, because that a 12-year-old has one foot in the teen world and one foot in the little kid world. And it is not uncommon for them one day to be like snuggling their lovey, and the next day to be wearing black eyeliner and drinking coffee. And that is the same person. So I think that was very exciting to me as a writer, but it was also sort of tricky. There was a lot of, I was aided enormously by the fact that I have 2 kids. My daughter's now is 13. So as I was writing it, my son was coming out of moving into adolescence, and she was coming into her tween years. So I had a constant assault of tween voice in my ear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think if you don't have that access to kids in your own home of that age, it's probably a good idea to get access to them somehow, and of course, it's difficult right now, but when things open up, volunteering in the classrooms or doing something to be around, even if you're just listening in the background as, this age, the middle schoolers are talking to each other and how they relate to each other and the language they use. And you can really get a sense of that dynamic. But I think you have to see it live, to be able to really absorb it properly, in my opinion, I think.
Yeah, it certainly makes it easier to make it feel authentic, because I didn't really ever have the preoccupation about its authenticity. What I did do was, I gave it to my kids to read, and I said to them, like, tell me if this moments where this feels like you're a grown-up pretending to be a kid. And they did. Oh, they loved to. They were like, what is this? Like, there was some word, I'm trying to think, like a peasant skirt or something. They were like, oh my God, we don't even know what that is. Like, or, just little moments like that, there were authenticity readers basically for me, and it was helpful. But I really treasured the moments that and now that the book's out, readers at large will tell me like, oh, like I loved this moment, or this moment really made me laugh, because I feel like, good, I did it.
When you're writing dialogue for that age group, how concerned are you with current slang?
Unconcerned. And okay. Well, let me add to that. So it is a concern, certainly. So part of what I did with Foreverland is I had it take place in this amusement park, and I have the protagonist, Margaret, leave her phone at home. On purpose, because she's running away. So she leaves her phone at home, and there are no phones, which was hugely liberating for me, because I didn't have to worry about technology being obsolete in 5 seconds, or the app I was mentioning being obsolete, or the slang. I see, having children this age, the velocity with which these things change. So for me personally, I because I was conceiving of it as a modern day Peter Pan, I did want it to have a perennial feel to it, something that if you picked it up in 10 years would feel timely and not dated. And for that reason, it was useful for me to get rid of technology. And I really did try to keep slang to a minimum because I wanted it to exist in this world. I'm working on a new book now where that's not the case. It takes place in a specific moment in time, and I am incorporating more slang because it's sort of unavoidable.
Right.
But I'm trying to, I don't know, it's hard. I'm trying to find slang that might have a longer shelf life than some of the words that pop up, because you never know. Is this going to be like in 2 months, are the kids going to be over it and it will seem like a time relic?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? Because you do want the next generation. I was thinking the other day that a generation in Kidlit is about 5 to 8 years because the kids grow out of the books and then the new group of kids comes in. So you want the next generation in 5 years to be able to read your book and not be like, what is she talking about? So it is a balance for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you teach memoir writing at Columbia and NYU, and you say on your website that you believe everyone has an unforgettable story to tell. How do we know if our story is interesting enough so that people outside of our family and friends would even care to read it?
Yeah, that is a big preoccupation of most of my students, I think.
Yeah.
I love teaching memoir because I do have such a diverse group of students with, radically different backgrounds and levels of experience writing, and many different reasons that they are writing. Some want to be published, some not. But I don't know. I'm going to venture to say that I really do think every story can be interesting to people besides your friends and family, provided that it is told in the right way. So I really do feel like that is my job as a teacher, is to provide my students, some of which have very limited experience writing, with the tools to take their true stories from kind of navel gazing, narratives that would be of little interest to other people, to stories that anyone could relate to and find interesting. And I don't think it has anything to do with the content, truly. I mean, I think, sure, yeah, there are certain stories that if I could give you an elevator pitch of the stories and be like, wow, I want to read that book. And that it definitely helps if you're trying to publish a memoir. But I do think that the style, is everything, because ultimately, with true stories and even with fiction, I mean, there's just so many stories in the world, right? They're so similar. All of our stories are so similar, but if you can, depict them and communicate them with vivid particularities, and if you can craft them well, I think that they will hold interest. Right. Maybe that's hokey, but I do believe it to be true.
Well, and I imagine when writing a memoir or even personal essays for magazines and newspapers, that your job is to create the writing, to tell it in such a way that there's a bigger takeaway for the reader. It's not just you venting about something that happened in your life that you really just want to get out. But I imagine there has to be a bigger takeaway that the reader can also get something from your experience that they take into their own life, or they learn something as well. Would you say that that's true?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's a classic sort of example of, in the specific, we find the universal, so that if you can write your story with enough specificity, that it's just this strange alchemy, but it does unlock this universality to it that it pulls people in and really engages them. And some of my favorite responses that I got, messages after my memoir was published, were from people who had radically different experiences than mine, but felt like they could relate so intensely. You know, there was a lot of people who had vision loss, and they felt that I was telling a story very similar to theirs. And I was really glad to hear that. But then there were also people who, you know, had other maladies and illnesses, and then other people who didn't have illnesses at all, but, you know, maybe had been in the closet and had just come out and felt like my story was relevant to them. And so it really does make you feel like, wow, we really are interconnected in this way. And it's as an avid reader and a longtime lover of literature, it did kind of restore my faith in humanity to see that. And I feel that way as a reader myself when I'm reading, you know, true stories and also fiction that's just really beautifully rendered and feel so authentic. I do feel like I am having that takeaway that you mentioned in the author depicting whatever transformation they are, makes me feel like I've learned or gained something. So I think that is essential. Yeah.
Well, we have a few questions here I want to get to, and if any of you have questions for Nicole, please put them in the Q&A box so I can keep track of them. We've had a couple people kind of want a little more detail about the whole proposal for nonfiction. When you said your memoir, you sold it on a proposal. And what we're talking here is, and this is with a memoir in the adult market, I think you can sell it on a proposal. With the children's market, if it's a narrative nonfiction that has an arc to it, like a biography or even a memoir in the kids arena, you probably have to write the manuscript. But when it's other kind of nonfiction, more expository, self-help, science-based, whatever, you can often sell it on a proposal. So what, in your memoir proposal, what kinds of things did you put in there so that the publisher really knew that you could do this?
So it was a while ago, but I remember pretty clearly. I had, I believe, 3 chapters, 3 solid chapters, which do not have to be the first 3 chapters, but often are, and in my case, they were. I had an annotated table of contents in which I gave about a paragraph long description of what would happen in every chapter in the book, which was extremely difficult to do. I don't know how I would, if I was doing that for fiction now, I don't know that I'd be able to do it. Even in memoir, sure, it's true and it happened to you, so you know how it ends, right? But crafting that structure without having written the book is extremely hard to do.
Yeah.
Like it's, so, but I did do that. So I did an annotated table of contents, and then the rest of it was, well, then there was also a detailed synopsis of the whole book, and then the rest of it was marketing pages, like pages in which I addressed the marketing. So I had several comparable titles, basically like on Amazon, what are the books that it would suggest? They were looking up your book. Where would it be shelved next to, in what section? And I did talk about my platform, how I would help basically sell the book. And yeah, just basically why, you know, the sort of skeleton of a marketing plan, basically, which is, you know, a lot to do.
It's a lot. It'd be easier just to write the book.
It really would be. I have to say, I think it probably took me as long to write the proposal as it did to write the book.
Wow. Yeah. Well, great. That's very detailed. And that type of proposal would be similar for a children's longer nonfiction. Now, someone asked in here about picture book nonfiction. And in that case, most publishers just want to see the whole manuscript because it's shorter. And writing picture books is such a specific skill that I think if you proposed a picture book nonfiction, but they couldn't see that you could actually pull it off, they would want to see the manuscript. So it's most common in the picture book, format to have the entire manuscript done. So a couple people have asked about platform, which we talked about social media, but when you say your author platform that you talked about in your proposal, what all were you referencing there as far as what your platform is?
Truthfully, I did not have much of one. I'll be quite honest with you. I remember, I'll say this, and this feels very dated and maybe just uselessly obsolete, but I did start, I had been writing for parenting magazines, and my agent did suggest for my nonfiction, I had told him I wanted to write this memoir, and he said, sure, great, but before we pitch that and we write a proposal, I would like you to have more of a platform. And this is funny because it feels like caveman times. He was like, you should start a blog. Nobody even knows what a blog is anymore, right? But it was not even that many years ago. But blogs are like, they're just not what they were, right? So I started a blog, and I was never hugely successful at building this massive platform of followers the way some people were, but the usefulness of the blog for me that I did not foresee was that it honed my narrative voice in a way I could have never done otherwise. I don't know that I would have been able to write my memoir had I not spent, I think it was 2 years writing this blog, because I would write like 4 to 5 times a week. I had 4 to 5 posts a week, almost daily. And I had to write fast because it was a blog. And so it allowed me to it freed up my narrative voice and let me find the voice I wanted to write my memoir in. So while I didn't get followers to the extent that, would be persuasive maybe to an editor, it did help me write the memoir. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I did write about my blog in the proposal. I just made it sound like, it was bigger than it was. It was an acclaimed blog, a beloved blog, because how do you prove that it's not beloved? Sure. I mean, I'm sure my sister loved it. But that was that. And then I talked about my, just my many years of writing for parenting magazines. So it was kind of tangential. Mm-hmm. Now I imagine it would just be so much about social media. Because you're able to just have this reach with social media. That's kind of incredible, but that does take a long time. I don't know that. I mean, some people seem to be successful at it quickly, but I do think it just takes time to accrue that kind of platform.
I think in general, and again, I'm speaking specifically in the children's book market here. When editors and agents say platform, what they want to know is that if people want to find you, if they Google your name, something will come up. And it will be hopefully a website that you will be developing, an author website, so that people can go find out about you, find out about your book. If teachers want to schedule you for a school visit, they know where to go to find that information. But also social media is important because they want to know that you can help promote your book. And so Twitter, Facebook, though I guess Facebook is, the kids aren't on Facebook. Is that true with your teenagers? Or
yeah, they're not even on Insta anymore. They're like, no, Insta was like so 5 minutes ago. It's like Snapchat and TikTok and new things that I don't even know the name of yet.
I know. Yeah, so good luck with all that. But again, if you're writing for kids, a lot of times what you're trying to do is reach the parents who are buying the books. So the parents are still on Facebook.
Yes, they are. That is correct.
And it doesn't have to be big and elaborate. You can sort of build it a little at a time. But I also know agents who say, when I get a manuscript from an author and I like it, the first thing I do is put their name into Google and see if anything comes up. So it's always good, I think, to have an author Facebook page that's separate from your personal one, because that way you can have a professional author presence and put that in your query letter and put your party pictures on your personal page. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so someone wants to know, how has the pandemic affected what you write about? Has it changed your writing at all?
How has it affected what I write about it? It's affected how much I write, which is less because I right now have 3 children learning from home. That has been a challenge.
Yeah.
To find the space, the
Mhm.
head. But I was working on a project that I had been a few months into when the pandemic hit. And for a while I was like, what will become of us? Will people, be interested in pre-COVID story? What will the world look like? What are kids going to want to read? It was a middle grade project. And do I need to adjust this to reflect the current reality? And then I just decided, no. This is the story I wanted to tell, and I've persisted with that. So it hasn't affected what I write. In fact, I have to say that writing about a pre-COVID world, the book that I am writing takes place, it's a contemporary book, but was being written before COVID. So writing about New York City, kids in New York City pre-COVID has been a tremendous release and escape for me. And I found that I was finding the time at like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And really, it was the best release and therapy and outlet. And I was loving it so much, like with this kind of interesting urgency, because it really felt like an escape to a larger extent than it typically does. Right. So I actually, I sort of doubled down on it, basically. Like I have a wonderful fantasy world that exists like January 2019 that I am retreating to in my fiction.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I have no idea if publishers are going to want pandemic books or not. I wouldn't rush to write them, because I imagine certainly in certain books, like some young adult fiction that takes place in 2020, will have to mention it. But I don't know if publishers are going to necessarily want books really centered around the pandemic that are fiction, but
Especially,
I could be wrong.
like, I agree with you. And I have to say, when I think about children's literature and kids,
Yeah.
when I think about like my own kids and I think about what are they interested in reading right now, I think what they want is an escape.
Absolutely.
And the thing about publishing is it takes so long.
Mm-hmm.
It's so slow. So by the time the book comes, if you were to sell your book today, completely finished, by the time it came out, like who knows what the world is going to look like. So I think of this too, because I sometimes I'm like, I need, is this idea exciting enough? Is it timely enough? And I feel like I can never quite, I'm not, I can't outsmart the trends and the zeitgeist enough to be ahead of it. So all I can really do, because publishing is so slow that, if I'm like, this is super timely, by the time I finish it and write it and I sell it and it comes out, like there's a billion books like that. So for me personally, I've just felt very guided by what story do I want to write right now. And I just have to trust that there will be people who want to read it when it eventually sees the light of day.
And I think that's really the best answer, is you have to write what you want to write, because that will be your best writing, and let the market take care of itself. So,
yeah.
So you mentioned your agent, And you had an agent before your memoir. So did you have an agent was your agent actually representing you to sell your magazine work and that kind of thing?
No, before I sold my memoir, I tried to sell another memoir. It's
Wow.
funny. It's really funny. I had an idea for a parenting memoir, very much based on the essays and articles I had written in the parenting sector. So in that sense, it really was a direct line. I had been writing so many essays about parenting, and then I thought, and I had a column in a local magazine that I wrote. So I really felt like, oh, I'm going to structure these into, I'm going to write a memoir about this stuff that is my niche, right? My parenting niche. And I put this proposal together for this parenting memoir, which was very funny, or I thought it was funny, and I couldn't sell it.
Mm.
And it was really funny. I distinctly remember I was devastated, obviously, right? I was like super devastated, and I was like, why doesn't anyone want to buy this? And I remember driving with my husband and thinking, like, what do I need to add to this memoir to make it, to give it the hook that it needs to sell? Like, do I need to add recipes? I was just spitballing these insane ideas. And my husband said to me, you know, you are losing your vision. And that is a very interesting story. I was, you know, very young at the time. I was diagnosed at 19. So, like, I think you might just want to. That was not at all a part of the memoir that I had pitched to them. This funny memoir about parenting had completely, I had deleted all references to this true thing that was happening to me. And he said, I think you just maybe need to write about that. And it was like a real eureka moment where I was like, well, of course, that's the story. It is both a hook and true, and the thing that I really need to be writing about. Yeah. So it's funny as writers how we sometimes, it's a little bit of a circuitous path. But then I was able to write that proposal, and that sold, and that was the first book that I sold.
Awesome. Awesome. Do your kids ever say, Mom, stop writing about us? Are they tired of
Oh my God, the opposite. The opposite.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my God, you already wrote a book for her. What about my book? What about I want to be the lead character in the book? Like they're attention hogs, and they would love nothing more. I mean, the teenagers are teenagers. So I part of why I transitioned to fiction was, you know, it was wonderful to write memoir, but it's exhausting and hard to talk about these things and to do all the interviews and speaking stuff, and then to have your, you know, your family is involved too. So I love the idea of having the you know, surrogate of fiction. So I can always be like, that's not true, it's fictional.
Right. Do your teenagers ever go back and read some of your parenting stuff about when they were little and go, oh my God, I can't believe you told the world that we did that?
No, as I said, they're like attention hog.
Yeah. So.
They love to read the stuff. They just think it's hilarious. And I feel like they love that it's immortalized. It's like looking at a photo album. That's what it is for them. They're like, oh, remember I said that? That's hilarious. They I've told them not to read my memoir. It has a lot of expletives. And other things. It's very adult. So hopefully they won't read it for a long time. I don't know what their reaction will be to that.
Well, you'll write about it. You can write an essay about it.
Yes.
Definitely. Well, great. Do you have any parting advice for our viewers here on writing, on being open to opportunities, on writing from your life, anything like that that you want to leave us with?
Let's see. Wisdom. My wisdom would be just to persist. Just maybe just a trite thing to say, but I do know, just, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, to persist in your writing. It's very difficult. And there's just so many forces at play that can really feel like obstacles, certainly, you know, obstacles to publication. And then even if you're published, obstacles to getting your book out there and being read enough, and so many lapses in confidence. So I really do think my advice would be, it's useful at a certain point to think about the market and those forces. But as we said before, you can never outsmart them. When you're starting to, in terms of the genesis of a book, I really think you should, you know, write what you want. And if that means, like, I may very well write adult fiction next. I have an idea. I'm a lot of pages into another book that is an adult fiction piece of work, and that would, you know, be a completely different market for me. But I do feel like, yeah, I could try to like always leverage my platform in this way, but at a certain point, if I feel compelled to write this, you know, that's what I should do, and the rest of it, like, I'll sort it out, I'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say. Just go where the writing takes you and trust that there will be people to read it.
Great. Well, thank you, Nicole. This has been wonderful. I appreciate your time and all your great advice tonight and hearing about your journey. So, and you all got to read Nicole's books. I actually have your memoir sitting on my bedside table, and I'm so excited to start it. So,
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight. This was really fun.
Well, great. Thank you. And I want to remind everybody again, our next distancing social will be on November 10th, Tuesday. We're starting Tuesdays in November, but we're skipping next week because you know what. So, so thank you all for joining us tonight, and we will see you on November 10th. Good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.